Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Good morning, beloved brothers and sisters. There comes a dreadful time in every generation when the people of God are put to the test. Woe to those who cut off the Scriptures and who dismember them. It's such a sad thing to see the canon of the Holy Bible limited, to see it cut down. The poor Protestants, they tell us that the Old Testament ends with the prophet Malachi. We would say to them that the Old Testament ends with John the Baptist, the last prophet. They say to us that Malachi's prophetic book is the last of the Old Testament, the last book. We would say no, third Maccabees is. The third book of Maccabees is. And so today we have a great lesson from this second book of Maccabees. You all know Nebuchadnezzar. I spoke of him last week, and that when Judah was conquered by Nebuchadnezzar, they were taken to Babylon for 70 years. And then God judged the Babylonians, and the Persians came and conquered them. And Cyrus looked upon the Jews with love, and he released them, and they went home. And he let them even build their wall. He let them rebuild Jerusalem, and they tried to rebuild the temple as well as they could. And they lived under the Persians for a period of time until Alexander the Great conquered that whole region. And he brought everyone under the power of the Greeks. And Alexander then went off and died. And his empire was rent into different parts, and there was a part that Israel was under, the Syrian part. And there was an awful king named Antiochus Epiphanes. He was this awful, awful man. And there's many, many things I could say, but that doesn't really help us. He had cause to be angry with the Jews, and he became enraged with them, rage beyond measure. And he punished them severely. And when he went to punish them, he said that they must become Hellenized, they must become Greeks. And so there was a pair of women who had circumcised their children, or had had them circumcised, and they were paraded through the streets, and then they and their sons were thrown off the wall of Jerusalem. Then after that, they said all Jews must go, and they must partake of the pagan festivals. They must parade themselves in festivals, and they must offer sacrifice. And this was awful. And they were executing those who didn't. They caught a group of Jews outside of Jerusalem who were offering prayer on the Sabbath day in a cave, and they burned them alive, all of them. But Antiochus was not content with any of this, and so he also knew the Jews had these dietary laws. They would not eat pork. They would not eat a product of pig. God had commanded they could not. And so he brought out pork, he brought out the flesh of the pigs, and then he brought out Eleazar the priest before many Jews, and he said to him, "Old man, I reverence your beard, I reverence your age. Spare yourself and eat this." And Eleazar, who was a scribe, the priest, he said, "How can I defile the law? How can I do this in front of all the young men who are watching me? I'm 90 years old, I've lived a long life. Why should I defile my old age so that I can live a little bit longer?" And he said, "No, I will not do this." And so the emperor had him tortured severely, severely. And as Eleazar was dying, he said, "It is true indeed that I could have lengthened my life for a short time, but I would have been in the hands of the Most High for eternity." He said, "It is true that in my flesh I suffer terribly, but in my soul I am joyful because I fear God." And he gave up the ghost. And 7 of his students, the children of the Maccabees, had seen his martyrdom or knew of it. It's hard to say because the accounts vary. Some of the accounts place them almost at his martyrdom. It's hard to say. But in any case, they were witnesses of this great man's martyrdom. They had seen it. And they were 7 brothers. Probably the oldest was maybe in his 20s, I don't know. They were all relatively young. And their mother was this widow named Solomonia. She was very intense, and she urged her sons to imitate their teacher. You are young men. Look at how your old, frail teacher endured everything. You should endure it as well. And so Antiochus brought them also forward before him, and he had all the instruments of torture laid out, and he had the pork laid out, the bacon or whatever it was. And he said, "Young man, you're handsome, you're strong, I'll give you offices, I'll flatter you, I'll honor you, come eat. Just touch it, eat, put it in your mouth, and I'll spare you. Don't be irrational. Meat, what is meat? Pigs come from God, don't they? They come from nature. Why can't you eat them? Just do it." And they would not. And the first son, the eldest one, stood up and he spoke very eloquently. He spoke back against the emperor, and he spoke so intensely that the emperor was enraged. He said, "Cut that man's tongue out now." And they cut out his tongue, then they scalped him, and then they hacked off his hands and his feet, and they put him onto this, it's like a griddle. It's like frying bacon. They fried him alive, as if he was human bacon. And smoke shot up from his death. And all his brothers watched, his mother watched. And the emperor turned to the next brother and said, "You, what about you?" And he basically was brought forward. They scalped him as well, and then they said, "Will you not eat?" And he said, "No." And they cut off his limbs, and they killed him as well. The third brother was really intense. He came out and he basically offered his tongue and his hands, and he said, "These came from heaven, and I disdain them for the sake of the law, and I will get them back again." And he was grotesquely executed. The fourth brother, this comes from 4th Maccabees. 4th Maccabees is not canonical, but if you go to Greece and you open up a Greek Bible, it's in the appendices of it. So 4th Maccabees is so beloved that, though it's not considered canonical, we put it in the back of the Bible, and we read it. And it's a wonderful book. This 4th book, Maccabees, deals only with this martyrdom. Only. And so according to this book, when the fourth brother came, the fourth brother said, "You do not have a fire that is hot enough to scare me, to make me play the coward. I won't." And so they executed the fourth brother. And the fifth brother and the sixth brother were killed. And some of the brothers almost said, the gist of it was, "What, do you think I'm the least of the brothers? Do you think I'm less than the other brothers who came before? I'm no different." And they were executed grotesquely. Finally, the last child was very small, very young, certainly a minor. The Synaxarion said he was 3, I don't know. He was very young. And Antiochus, the emperor, he looked at him and he said, "Surely, child, don't follow the foolishness of your brothers. I will give you a king. I will give you a kingdom. I will give you authority. I will put you in scarlet robes. I will give you authority. Your name will be praised, and you will have me as your friend." And he turned to the woman and he said, "Take pity on yourself and convince your son to do this." And his mother, Solomonia, bent down and whispered in Hebrew to him. She said, "Son, take pity upon my womb. I carried you for 9 months, and with my breast I nursed you for 3 years. Do not obey this idolater. Do exactly what your brothers have done. Do not put your teacher to shame, or your brothers to shame, or our family to shame. Do not do it. Do not yield to him." And so the boy didn't even really need much encouragement from his mom. He actually raged against the emperor. He shouted at him and mocked the emperor, and then he was executed even worse than the other ones. And finally, the mother herself gave up the ghost and died. Whether she just gave up her spirit or whether she leaped into the fire herself, I don't know. What I'm telling you now is a tame account of this martyrdom. Because if you read the books, it's much more grotesque than this. And yet not a single one of them yielded. Not a single one of them did. And all of this was before the time of grace, before the coming of Christ, before the Holy Spirit lived inside of men. The Holy Spirit rested only on the outward part of these people. And yet that was enough for them to become like this. And beloved, I want to talk to you about how great martyrdom is, how glorious it is. In this case, there was a plate of pork, a plate of bacon, whatever it was, doesn't matter. A plate of pig flesh on a pellet that was offered to them. If I could read to you the tortures they suffered, I did them actually injustice by the way I described them to you. Yet none of them would even touch it. And I want you to understand how great martyrs are, because I want you to think of Adam and Eve. What did Satan threaten them with to eat of the tree? What did he threaten them with? Nothing. He had no power to threaten them with anything. All he did was lie to them, and they chose to eat of the tree. Satan did not say to Eve, "I will skin you alive if you don't eat of the tree." He didn't wrap himself around her like a boa constrictor and says, "I will squeeze you until you eat of the tree." He didn't do any of this. Look at how awful this fall was. That Satan, with a few words, caused them to destroy the universe, to cast us into hell, into this awful reality that we live in. Right? And think about ourselves, how often we sin without much provocation. The martyrs are so great, both these Maccabees and also all the fathers and mothers who came after in the New Covenant, who suffered so much, and yet they would not yield. In the time of the Romans, they said, "Drop a pinch of incense, take a little piece of incense and throw it into this fire," and that is enough. You don't even have to believe that Caesar is God, just honor him, and you can go back to praying to your God. I don't care. Show deference. And they would not even do this. Not even this. They wouldn't cast in a pinch of incense. There was one great saint, St. Varlaine, who the pagans tortured him so badly they couldn't get him to do anything. So finally they brought him before the idol and they mocked him. They held out his hand and they put a coal into his hand. And they put a piece of incense on the coal and they said, "Oh, he will involuntarily sense the idol." They couldn't make him do it, so they just mocked him. Except this martyr grabbed the charcoal and held it until it burned through his hand, and his hand fell off, and he dropped dead, and offered up his soul to God. So for the first 3 centuries, beloved, the church offered nothing but blood. It offered the blood of Christ in the Holy Liturgy, and it offered up the blood of martyrs constantly. Constantly, it was martyrdoms. If you look at our Synaxarion, most of them are martyrs scattered throughout. There's martyrdoms everywhere. Men, women, children, all across the empire. In every location there were martyrs. Always. And the Christians would take the bodies and they would serve divine liturgy over them, and they would serve in catacombs and they would do these things. Why is this? Because what do our saints say to us? Saint Sophrony, this great teacher, he says that God gives himself up. That's what we celebrate today, the cross. He gives himself up completely. But he waits. He waits for the one or those who will give themselves up to him. And for us, these are the martyrs. If you go and you read St. Basil the Great and St. Gregory the Theologian, St. John Chrysostom, they loved this time, this first 3 centuries. They would speak about it with such yearning. They would say these were the times when these martyrs were happening constantly. Constantly those executions. They said these were the great times. These were the times in which the church was so strong. When these times ended, and they were so brutal, but when they came to an end, the men and women of the time that came after said, what will we do? What will we do? There's no more martyrdoms. There's no more pagans to execute us. It's against the law to be pagan. Who's going to execute us? And so they executed themselves. They went into the desert and put on chains and hair shirts and lived in caves and ate nothing and lived a martyric life there. And they said martyrdoms must continue. So they went into the desert and continued this path, this pattern of life. Think of Adam and Eve, beloved. Think about how they sinned for nothing. And think about what the martyrs gave to God in exchange for righteousness. What they offered to him. They offered everything. Their hands, their skin, their limbs, their teeth, their eyes, everything they gave to him. They held nothing back. Now think about how much boldness they will have in the next life when they stand before God. Oh my goodness, beloved, how much faith you should have in martyrs when you pray to them, when you ask for their help. Because what will they say to God? Someone will go to the martyr and say, Holy Father, great George, pray for me. And St. George will turn to God and say, Oh Lord, remember my 7 deaths, my horrendous martyrdoms, my breaking on the wheels, the fires, the torments, all those things. And the Lord will say, oh, of course, whatever you ask, George, maybe so. Because the Lord will look at him and say, oh, my sacrifice. A sacrifice so pleasing to me. Think about the smoke rising up from these cauldrons, beloved, of flesh cooking, but God smelled this smell and he said, this is an aroma pleasing to me. This pleases me. This is more pleasing to me than Noah's offering after the flood. Think about it. God condemned the whole first world because of the iniquities, and now it's not the smell of goats and bulls rising, it's the smell of human flesh cooking, and God smells it and says, this is the flesh offered to me by those who love me. Amen. And he takes it. Beloved, Christ is the man. He is the mark of man. He is the true man. And so, what does it mean to be fully human, to be like Christ? So for us, the martyrs have always been the mark of what it means to be truly human. The truly human person is the martyr, the one who gives everything to God and lives only for him. And so the church has never ceased to offer this sacrifice to God. Always, every century we've offered martyrs, every century we've offered them. In the last century we've offered perhaps more than ever before. We've always offered them. And for us, the martyrs are the standard by which we should live. We should live by this standard. We should look at the martyrs always. They should be before our eyes. We should have icons of them. We should sense them with incense. We should bow down before them. We should venerate them. And we should pray to them. And we should say, help me, O holy ones, to become like you, to give myself to Christ. And when we are under temptation, and we yield so easily to temptation, we should think about them and their labors. And we should say, why do I yield so easily to temptation? When the third son offered his tongue and his hand, saying, I will get them back again. And you know, Christians should actually surpass the Maccabees. Why? Think about how great the Maccabees are. The Maccabees have faith in a resurrection they have not seen. They only have what the prophets have said and what Moses has said. But the martyrs that came after, they knew Christ. And so they knew he had risen from the dead. And so they had massive faith in him. Massive faith. For them, they were so joyful. The martyrs of the early times, beloved, they were joyful. They wept. They said, how unworthy I am to receive this blessing. The blessing of offering myself up to God. What a great blessing it is. And how unworthy I am of it. And beloved, we count ourselves complainers when we undergo small hardships. Beloved, read the Maccabees. I actually would say to you, go and read it. I should penance everyone to go and read 1st, 2nd Maccabees, and then read 4th Maccabees. Go find it and read it. And then whenever you have troubles, you should say to yourself, are my troubles even comparable to the sufferings of these people? And their suffering was voluntary. Absolutely voluntary. And we will not endure light involuntary sufferings for the sake of Christ. Beloved, take strength from the martyrs, always. Our church has always done so. From the beginning until now, it has always done so. Take your strength from them. Look at them. May they be your heroes and the heroes of your children, not all the other garbage that our society has. None of the other heroes are worthy of them. Like I said, all the fathers of our church loved them. If you go to Mount Athos and you mention the martyrs, their eyes tear up and their eyes flash and they say, the martyrs. Martyrdom is so good. Such a blessing before the face of God. Beloved, ponder them. Ponder them daily, every day ponder them, and think about them. And conform your life to them. By their prayers before the face of God, always, now, and ever, and to the ages of ages. Amen.